If you like these videos, please check out my full course at www.lsat.totaltestprep.net with tons of clearly explained actual LSAT questions written by someone who's mastered test and helped others master it, and an evaluation period where you only pay if you want to continue.
Okay, so this is our second introductory video to the LSAT. And here we're going to discuss the different multiple choice sections that are scored on the test in a little bit more detail. So one of them is the analytical reasoning section, the other is the logical reasoning section, and the third is the reading comprehension section. So let's start with the analytical reasoning. This is the section that is more commonly known or colloquially known as the game section or the logic game section. And this is the section that tests the, quote, organization and management information and the ability to draw reasonable inferences from it. So it's always going to be one of the four scored sections, and it's always going to have four short passages known as the logic game. So you'll find one of the scored sections is going to be this game. The game section is going to have these four short passages, also known as the games, and each game is going to have 5 to 7 questions. So those four games and 5 to 7 questions will be about 22 to 24 questions per section. This tends to be the shortest section. Now, what can you expect to find in the game section? Well, each passage or each game presents a scenario, and that scenario is similar to a logic puzzle, like a brain teaser. And after this scenario, you'll be given rules that determine relationships between the elements in that game or that puzzle or that scenario. And excuse me, the questions are going to ask about the relationships between those elements. So the questions deal with those logical relationships. The point of the section is to test your abstract reasoning skills, your ability to look at the elements and to make inferences about the elements and about the relationships between the elements. Now, the logic games are all about rules and interconnected information. So, parallel to what's going on in the law, a law may have lots of different elements, a specific law, and it may have these different elements that are related in different ways. So appealing to one part of the law has consequences to other parts, and maybe to other laws even. So knowing how different rules interact is essential to dealing with complex laws, and that's what this section tests. So this is sort of that one dimension, one particular dimension of the type of skills that you'll need to have in legal study and in the practice of law. It's the more abstract logical abstract reasoning abilities, and that's what this section tests. Now, this section can come at any point. So that's the other thing. All of these sections, there's no set sequence. So there's one scored games or analytical reasoning section. It covers what we just talked about, and it can come at any point. The logical reasoning section is more commonly known as the arguments. And so this is the section that tests your ability to think critically and the analysis and evaluation of the reasoning and arguments of others. You're dealing with arguments in this one. And this one is always 2 out of the 4 scored sections. So it constitutes about 50% of the test. So there's between 24 and 26 short arguments, and they're followed by a question, and sometimes you'll get 2 questions following an argument. So that's a total of 50 to 52 questions per test in terms of the 100, 102 questions that are scored. About half of them are going to be arguments questions. Okay, so what can you expect to find on this section? Well, arguments are going to present a scenario, and the questions are going to relate to the reasoning structure in the scenario. So for example, can you identify the main point of the argument? How can you strengthen the argument? How can you weaken the argument? And there's plenty of other categories that we'll go into in a lot of detail. This section is designed to test your ability to reason logically, to see whether or not you can evaluate arguments. It deals more with your ability with your verbal reasoning abilities. Specifically, can you evaluate information quickly? Can you judge the validity of the reasoning and not focus on the truth or falsity of what they present? So this is, like I said, this tests that area of law and legal study which is more concerned with the ability to evaluate verbal reasoning. And once again, It can come at any point. Okay. The third section type is the reading comprehension section, and this is the section that tests the reading and comprehension of complex text with accuracy and insight. And there's always going to be one reading comprehension section. There will be 3 long passages and 1 dual passage. So essentially, it will be 2 shorter passages, which are both on the same topic, with 5 to 8 questions per passage for a total of between 26 to 28 questions. This tends to be the longest single section. So it'll have, like I said, between 26 and 28. The games tends to be the shortest, 22 to 24, and the arguments are between 25 to 26. Now, the contents of the passages are generally about something in the arts or in the humanities, science or history, but you don't actually need to have any information, any previous information. The content of the passages is just the vehicle for them to determine and test how well you can identify the more logical relationships in the information. So you actually don't have to have any previous understanding of what they're talking about. It's self-contained. So, what can you expect to find? Well, each passage is generally an argument, and it's an argument in support of a particular thesis. And the questions essentially test your ability to follow the dense information in the passages and also to understand the logical structure behind the passages. So, for example, you'll be asked once again, what's the main point? What's the author's purpose? What's the role of, say, the second paragraph? You'll be asked to identify the structure of reasoning or the method of reasoning. And once again, there's plenty of other types which we'll go into detail in later lessons. For the double passage questions, you might be asked to do some sort of comparison or an evaluation of the relationship between the passages. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same thing. Okay, so this, like I said, this section tests your ability tests to see how well you can follow long, dense pieces of information, how critically and how well you can read. Okay, and as with the other ones, it can come at any point. Now, there are going to be additional sections. So one of them, as was mentioned previously, is an experimental section. Now, and this can be any type of the ones we just went over, of the games, arguments, or reading. It can be any type of multiple choice section. So the games, arguments, or reading. And it can come at any point in the test. You'll have to do all 5 of the sections as if they'll all be graded, meaning you won't know which one of the 5 sections that you're doing is the experimental section. The point of the experimental section is to test future LSAT questions. So you're essentially going to have an additional game section or a third argument section or an additional reading section, but you won't know which one of the 2 games or 2 reading or 3 arguments is the one that is unscored. You'll have to do all of them. And the point of that is for them to test questions to make sure that they're adequate questions that they will use in future exams. There is additionally a writing section, and this is unscored, so it does not factor into your scale score of 120 to 180. You'll be asked to write an essay in support of one of 2 alternatives. It'll be an argumentative essay, so you'll have to make an argument. And as I mentioned, it's actually not given during the administration when you're taking the test. You do that separately via the internet when you get home. Okay, so that's a little bit more information about the specifics of the different section types, more specifically or more concretely the ones that are multiple choice, and a little bit more about these additional sections. In the last introductory video, we're going to go into a little bit more in depth about the specifics of how to approach studying for the test and other fundamental questions.